what your nightmare scenario is in honor of this day of Halloween we have right now. The nightmare scenario for your conference in the CFP to keep them shut out of it. What is up, everybody? It is Jake with Master of Football back at it again. Happy Tuesday. Thank you so much for being here. If you want to be updated on all things pro football, college football, video game football, and Madden, draft, anything related to American football, hit that red subscribe button. You will not be disappointed. Also hit the like button too, and follow on Twitter/X. That fam is growing. Without further ado, let's get into the video. So as you guys can see, I am a Raiders fan. So let's just say I'm having a horrible night right now watching Monday Night Football. But while this nightmare is going on for me, I want to make sure I can address nightmares that might happen for other teams, especially in the world of college football. There's two games this past weekend that made me think, I know there's a lot of people who think, oh, this team's going to be in, well, that team's going to be in, this conference is going to be in, that conference is going to be in. There's a lot of scenarios that could play out to where your team and or your conference could get shut out of the CFP. That includes both of these games. First one here is Kansas versus Oklahoma. Thinking about this, Oklahoma, very good team, had the lead going into that final minute there. In the final 55 seconds, a touchdown, and it was an intentional touchdown given up, but touchdown given up by Oklahoma versus Kansas. Man, that right there is going to hurt them eventually. We're going to address that later on. But not only was this game, there was also another game against a much less heralded team. Think about this. Kansas is now 6-2. What about being a team that was previously 2-5? I watched most of this game too. Washington goes and visits Stanford at the farm down there, and within the final 2 minutes, it was a 2-point game. Ultimately, they scored a touchdown. There was a fourth down play where they dropped the pass, something like that. So Stanford, Washington, still a tough game. Thinking about that team was heading into that game. Stanford was 1-4 in the Pac-12, but still gave the number 5 and undefeated Washington Huskies fits. So what I've done is I've broken it down from 6 conferences, including some G5 teams, to break down what your nightmare scenario is in honor of this day of Halloween we have right now. The nightmare scenario for your conference in the CFP to keep them shut out of it. We're going to have a breakdown of it. What it's basically going to be is there's going to be a glass meter of how likely this is going to happen. Glass full, it's probably going to happen. Glass half full, it's more than likely going to happen. Glass half empty, it's probably not going to happen. And then glass empty, it won't happen. Let's get into it right now. Start with those G5 teams who are probably not going to be involved in it anyway. All right, so going through these G5 teams that are not being included right now, we have number 21, Tulane right now. So this is for the CFP. Right now, they've got one loss. They lost to Ole Miss, but they are still a possible New Year's Six invite as well, just because they've played so well so far. So again, Tulane is still in it for the New Year's Six, but probably out of it for the CFP. Going on to Liberty right now. Liberty is still unranked, despite being an 8-0 team. They're 8-0 in Conference USA. Unfortunately for Conference USA, it is one of the most mishmashed conferences that is out there. Many of the teams aren't even eligible to play in the postseason. But again, they are 8-0. Deserve credit. Still not ranked though. Toledo is a 1-loss team right now too. However, that one loss was at the very beginning of the season to a 3-5 Big Ten team, Illinois. Like I said, probably out of the CFP. Again, could still be a New Year's Six possible invite. Same thing with Fresno State. Fresno State lost to an above-average Mountain West team in Wyoming. They lost at Wyoming, but they're still in consideration for the New Year's Six. I think that if they go 12-1 and Tulane goes 12-1, Tulane will have the edge over them. But again, all you got to do is do that to get into the CFP. Just make sure you're the top team of the G5s, not the CFP, excuse me, the New Year's Six. And then last but not least, number 23, James Madison, undefeated in the Sun Belt, but because of their move from the FBS to the FBS, they're still barred from postseason play. So the first one here is pretty likely. And again, the Mountain West nightmare scenario. So currently, Air Force is the number 17 team in the country. Now, they have 4 games left, including the Mountain West Championship game. They have a couple opportunities for some wins there that could add to that resume there. UNLV is a pretty good team this season. Boise State had a rough start, but they're slowly turning things around. They're back to 4-4 again, so they're decent. I'm not going to say they're good, but then projected right now, they would have to play Fresno State in the Mountain West Championship game. They beat UNLV, they beat Boise State, they beat Army in a neutral site game, they beat Hawaii, whatever those teams are, whatever. But again, you rip off those 5 games in a row, you have a chance at the CFP. But if you lose to either UNLV, at Boise State, or Fresno State in the Mountain West Championship game, you are going to be held out of the CFP indefinitely. Likelihood this is going to happen is the glass full. This is 100% going to happen. Even if they go 5-0, they're still probably going to be held out of the CFP. And more than likely, their schedule's been a little soft so far, but we'll see what happens to them. More than likely, Air Force in one of its final 5 games is probably going to lose at least one. They're going to be held out of the CFP. All right, now for the ACC nightmare scenario. So right now, North Carolina, 2 inexplicable losses the last 2 weeks. I have no idea what to make of that. Lost to Georgia Tech, for God's sake, not even really that good of a team. So all that's really left, their only real opportunity is Florida State in the CFP. You see the fact they still have to play at Miami and at Florida. 2 rivalry games. We'll see what happens. If they lose either one of those, it's going to put a big dent in it. But let's just say they lose to either one of those. They also lose the ACC championship game as well. Then the ACC is going to be held out. Louisville is currently 7-1. So I know people are, oh, well, Louisville 7-1, 7-1, 7-1. And again, if they were to beat Florida State in the conference championship game, something like that, they would probably have a good case going into the CFP, but they'd also have a win over Notre Dame and then a loss at 2-6 Pitt right now that would really, really hurt their chances at the CFP. They would definitely, it would be a tiebreaker where they would lose that every single time. The likelihood that this ACC nightmare scenario happens is glass half empty. I do have some faith in Florida State. They don't really have a lot of weaknesses. They're strong everywhere. They're good at quarterback, running back, defensive line, offensive line. They're really, really solid. They have multiple ways to win games. I have faith in them. But again, always that chance that they don't make it. Right now, the likelihood that this happens, glass half empty, probably less than likely, but still a realistic shot. All right, up next is the Big 12 nightmare scenario. And the Big 12 nightmare scenario, I personally think, is more than likely going to happen just because we have no idea what to expect from a couple teams here. First of all, Quinn Ewers has been knocked out. We don't know if he's going to be back or not for this next game, but Texas has a tough road to end the season. At home versus Kansas State, a team that gives them some problems. At TCU, at Iowa State versus Texas Tech, and likely the last time those teams are all going to play them for potentially decades. So they're all going to bring their best. We'll see what happens with those games. But like I said, Texas loses one of these games here. We don't know. They struggled with Houston a couple weeks ago. So if Texas were to lose another one of these games, but then Texas beats Oklahoma in the Big 12 championship game, again, Texas or Oklahoma could still lose to Oklahoma State. There's a couple of games they could still lose there, but more than likely, Texas loses another one of their games. They beat Oklahoma, so they are a 2-loss team in the Big 12. They are more than likely going to be knocked out of the CFP in that instance. The likelihood that this scenario happens, glass half full, above a 50% chance, in my opinion. All right, now it's time for the Big Ten nightmare scenario. So the Big Ten nightmare scenario boils down to the fact that there's basically, it's a 3-way race, and if everybody splits with each other, that we've got a weird scenario that happens. So right now, Ohio State has beaten Penn State, so they already have that win. They're still undefeated. Michigan is still undefeated. Penn State has 1 loss. If Michigan loses at Penn State, but again, right now they're putting that like a 50-50 shot. We don't know what to make of that. We know that Penn State's offense has struggled a little bit these last couple weeks. But let's just say they lose to them. They beat Ohio State, okay? So they're 11-1. Ohio State is 11-1, but Michigan goes to the conference championship game more likely, or depending upon what the tiebreaker is with Penn State. I wouldn't be surprised if Penn State lost another game. That's just me. I'm not going to bet on it, but I wouldn't be surprised at that. But then the miraculous thing here is Michigan loses the Big Ten championship game right now. Unfortunately, I don't know what to make of that. I mean, do they lose to Minnesota? Do they lose to Iowa? Do they lose to Nebraska, who they already beat at Nebraska? I don't know. Right now, I'm putting the likelihood that this happens that glass is empty. Either way, Michigan, I think, is going to get in the CFP. I already said yesterday that I think Ohio State for sure has, again, even if they lose to Michigan, if Michigan runs the table and they're undefeated, and Ohio State's only loss was at Michigan, dude, they've got a really good shot at the CFP. So like I said, Big Ten nightmare scenario in which they are locked out of the CFP, likelihood glass is basically empty at this point. Now, this Pac-12 one, unfortunately, is not a empty glass. So the thing about the Pac-12 right now is we see, again, Oregon went to Utah and had a great game. Really, really fantastic. Washington went to Stanford and did not. Fortunately, Washington, on offense, they don't really have one way to play. And again, with the fact that if your quarterback has to throw you, you can throw you out of a lot of problems. But unfortunately, it just seems like there's always those teams, whatever it is, Pac-12, after dark, the dreaded games that they have, we don't know what happens. But a Pac-12 scenario in which this happens, a nightmare scenario in which they're locked out of the CFP, either Oregon or Washington loses another game in the regular season. So think about this. Both teams have 4 games left. 5 of those 8 regular season games between these two teams are ranked opponents. There's going to be, Oregon State and Utah and USC. There's so many good teams still on the board for these teams in a couple rivalry games. We got Oregon State against Oregon. We got Washington State versus Washington. We don't know what happens in those games. They're crazy. Either way, whatever one of those teams loses their final one of their games, beats a one-loss version of the other team in the conference championship game, or everybody just beats everybody in the conference champion is 11-2, 10-3, something like that. It's a nightmare scenario, but again, it's not unrealistic for this to happen. Likelihood, like I said, maybe not glass full. I think the Pac-12 has a chance, but I think the glass is 3/4 full that a nightmare scenario in which the Pac-12 just beats up on itself and an 11-2 team tries to go to the CFP and gets shut out. I would not be surprised if that happens. And last but not least, the SEC nightmare scenario, it basically just involves Georgia, because right now, Georgia is looking really good. They're starting to turn up a little bit. You see the fact that people are starting to, like, oh, we don't know if Georgia's that team this year. We don't know if Georgia's that team this year. Georgia's starting to crank it up a little bit here. Again, I have the glass empty in this scenario, but we see the fact there's a possibility they could lose one of their final 4 games, number 14 versus number 14 Missouri versus number 11 Ole Miss, at number 19 Tennessee, or at Georgia Tech. Georgia Tech's a weird team where they'll lose to Bowling Green and then they'll beat North Carolina. I have no idea what the hell to make the Georgia Tech. It's a crazy rivalry game. We don't know what to expect, but we do know that Georgia is a physical, one of the more sure things we have in college football right now. But again, 3 ranked teams down the stretch there. High likelihood that could happen. Also in the scenario, let's just say they lose one of those games. They still, if they were to win out, they would still make it to the CFP. But if Alabama loses to LSU this week and LSU runs the table, LSU wins the SEC West. I know these teams played each other last year and it was a definitive win for Georgia. But again, LSU beats Georgia in the SEC championship game. They're 11-2. They do beat Georgia and they do beat Alabama. But again, a couple losses there. You just don't really know. There's a possibility. Like I said, this is glass empty because I think even if they were to go, this scenario were to happen, there's still probably a 50-50 shot that LSU would get in just on the fact of their resume. That's just how I think here. But I'm thinking that more than likely, Georgia's probably going to win out. They're going to at least go 12-0. I think that LSU is interesting in the conference championship game. But like I said, more than likely, this is not going to happen here. Georgia is probably going to go to the CFP. What they do, we will see. The nightmare scenarios for each of these conferences is coming up. Who knows what happens with Florida State? I think they're the most likely to make it to the CFP, but again, they've got to play at Miami, got to play at Florida. Georgia has 3, and if you count the conference championship game in the SEC, they have 4 ranked opponents of their last 5 games, and they got to play at Georgia Tech, who had a miraculous win over North Carolina last week. There's lots of possibilities for some player hating. I think the Pac-12 is just destined for a bunch of player hating out there. There's a lot of ways that a lot of teams could prevent their conference from going to the CFP. We're going to see, man, there's a couple games coming up here that are going to really, really reflect what happens with these conferences. All right, guys, get in the comments right now. Which scenario do you think is going to happen, isn't going to happen? What about this scenario? What about that scenario? You guys let me know what you guys think. And remember, please like and subscribe as well. But that's it for me, guys. I'll see you guys later. I am out.